I never really choose the projects that I work on. These days, I guess, they really seem to choose me. And I guess over the years, I've just learned to go with the flow. After speaking to one or two witnesses online and taking a look at the British Bigfoot online map of witness sightings, I knew I had to get involved, and I knew that it would be a long-term commitment to do the project justice. Having access to locations where a wildman or a Bigfoot had been witnessed is a huge advantage, but I knew that travelling the UK to meet other witnesses and researchers was the key to opening up the Bigfoot subject. And although it currently stands somewhere between 30 and 40 field researchers, I know that it's the British Bigfoot research team's aim to increase that tenfold. And I think the ultimate goal is to interest the mainstream scientists who might be able to help protect such a species if one is found. The most asked question would probably be, where are the skeletons? Where are the bodies? And it's a very valid question. Also, is Britain large enough to support such a species? And the last question I have is this creature flesh and blood or something more supernatural? And over the years, this species and perhaps others that live in the wilds have seen what evil man can do. So it really comes to as no surprise to me that this species, the wild man, the woodwolves, Bigfoot, the werewolf, if it exists, would certainly do its utmost to avoid contact with human beings. It's a simple case of survival, and they're fantastic at it. If you do an internet search for the British Bigfoot, you'll come across a lady called Deborah Hatswell, who's been quietly researching behind the scenes for 35 years since her encounter in around 1985. Deborah was playing truant from school with a friend, and they were unfortunate enough to think that the teacher was coming. It just so happens that it wasn't the teacher. Now, I've been really fortunate and I'm very lucky that Deborah's agreed to speak to me for the first time ever on camera. So I'm really looking forward to this. You never know how these things are going to go, so let's hope that everything goes to plan.
Why me? Why did I see him? Why me that day and not 10 minutes more and I might have gone, or an hour and a half before and I wouldn't have been there? So why did that happen that day? And the most sensible, logical answer is it just happened by happenstance. It just happened. I just happened to be there. But that just happened has took 34 years for me, and I'm still 34 years on, want to go and camp there at night and see if I can see him again. That's the logical side of my brain. But Debbie, the witness, there's no way I ever want to see that again. Never. I don't ever want to see that again. Never. I don't want my girls to see it. I don't want you to see it. I don't want anyone to ever feel that frightened that they feel like they need to lock the door and never come out again. Because that's how I felt. I'm choking up now because I'm back there. I wanted to get away as quickly as I could to my mum. I wanted my mum. I thought, he's going to get me, he's going to kill me, he's going to grab me, he's going to take me. All of that in an eighth of a second going through your brain, with your logical brain going, get up and run, girl, get up and run. I grabbed my friend and threw her to the floor. I kicked her to the floor so he'd get her. You get her and don't get me. But that fear is still there in me to this day, and I can't make that go away. I can soften it, and I can look at it logically, and I can say, Debbie, these other people feel like this. There's other people out there who feel like you. And that makes me get through the day. But at the end of the day, I'm still that 15-year-old kid who hasn't got an answer, who doesn't know, who wants somebody to come and say to me, there's the answer. I'll take it all away. I'll take all your fear away. You never have to do another radio show. You never have to write another article. I'll take it away and I won't do it. I'd still have that fear because of the witnesses, because there's other witnesses out there who feel like that. And I couldn't sleep at night knowing that I'd done everything I could to make that person feel better. Yeah. So if that's all I ever do, if I never prove this a wild man, and I never convince people to go and look, I'll know that I've done everything I can do. And another part of me is, I want you to go out and enjoy the woods. I want you to get back to nature. It stopped me. It was my favourite place to be, and it stopped me going. It stopped me going. It stopped me doing something I loved. I'm sorry.
Don't apologise. Just have a minute.
5 minutes.
No, I want to get it over and done with. It's just because I'm back there. That's what it does to me. This is the real me. This is the 15-year-old that saw him. Not the educated 50-year-old who, you know, can write it down on paper and logicalise it all and put it in a little box and make it nice and safe for myself. This is how I feel when I'm in the wood. The minute it goes dark, the minute it gets dusk, I'm gone. I can't do it. I think he's behind every tree. I think he's going to pop up in front of me. Why would he do it? He wouldn't do that. It's ridiculous. But that's the only way I can prove that I saw something that scared me this much. Because I don't scare easy. And to carry it on all this time, I can think about my wedding, my children's births, all of that. Just make me feel like this, you know. But to just think of that split second, that little 10 seconds that changed my life, this is what happens.
Wow, I mean, that's the first time or one of the few times in 10 years of doing this that I've had such an emotional reaction, really powerful interview. And the interesting thing is about that, whatever Deborah saw that day, she wasn't alone.
Went into the woods anyhow, and we were building an assault course. You know, what you have in the army and whatever, rope swings, you know, things that you climb up on, tree platforms. We made one of them all the way through the wood, you know, from one end to the other. And we thought, you know, we were there with three friends of us at there. Well, there were me, 2 other friends. My other friend went home early. He just disappeared. So me and Mark Ormby, we just thought, oh, we'll give it a run through. So we ran from one end to the other, just going through the assault course, seeing if it worked well. And we got to the far end, and it's like a fallen down tree that was there. I remember the fallen down tree part, and we were stood there for a while. And we weren't far from the actual walkway itself. It wasn't far. I said 15, 20 foot away. I think I saw it first, actually. Yes, I saw it first because I said, look, there's somebody coming. I said I thought they were walking the dog, and it stopped. I remember it stopping, like it could hear us or something, messing around, mucking around and stuff. And it turned. It stopped. It turned. But as I saw the widthness of it, how wide it was as it turned, I'm thinking it's not a person. So I didn't know where to put myself really. And it just made the sound it made was just, I don't know, it was like a screechy, groany sound that it made. No, I can't even do it. I can't even do the impression of it. I wouldn't even try. And it just, but you could make out the detail of it. You see the muscle on it. I remember seeing the muscles on its arm, this side. Not much this side, but this side you could see its arm. And as it turned, you could see the bulkiness of it. And just before it made its grunting groan, you could see it breathe in and then exhale it. I'm thinking, oh. And being a kid at 12 years old, 13, it's a bit too much for me, that. So I went, and I didn't want to go back for a long time, years actually. I took Janine there, my partner, just to show her, and even then I felt I shouldn't have been there when I went back.
After just 2 weeks research, I now had 2 witnesses that had described the same creature. They live within 50 miles of one another, and there were other sightings in those areas too. The next logical step was to head to Scotland to see a lady called Charmaine Fraser, who had been fortunate enough to see Bigfoot not only once, but twice.
My experience was, basically it was one day, I was up at my grandparents' up at Carmiley, and I was going down to the neighbours down the road to pick up the newspapers because they'd get delivered down the road, and it was something that we were always quite happy to do because the neighbour, Mrs Sturrock, would give you a sweetie, you know, and so me and the dog were heading, there's a wee track that leads from the property down onto another track before you get onto the tarmac road. There's a curve in this track, and I'm just walking down onto the wee farm track, and the dog I was with, she just stopped dead, and she started whining and snarling, and I looked at her and I remember seeing the hair on her back was just up, you know, her hackles were up, she was kind of baring her teeth, her eyes were bulging, it was like she couldn't decide how to react to something. And you know, I was a kid, so I was kind of just walked past her, or probably ran past her, you know, and then kind of ended up just onto the farm track, and I look up and there's just this big black figure standing along the track, and it had its back to me, and it was bending down a branch of this ash tree that was in the side of the road, and it was just looking at the leaves on the end of this ash tree. I hadn't broken it off or anything, it was just looking at it. And it was pretty tall, but it was really broad, absolutely pure black. I didn't know what it was, I just stood in shock and stared at it for probably a couple of seconds. It didn't seem to know I was there until I screamed. And then the arm comes down and it slowly starts to turn to its right. And I was off, didn't see its face, just off back to the house, belting on the kitchen door, absolutely floods of tears, screaming, there's a monster, I've seen a monster. And they were like, oh no, it must be a neighbour. I'm thinking, well, you know, it wasn't a bloody neighbour, you know, it was, to me it was a monster. And the way the dog was, you know, she was freaking out, absolutely freaking out. And to the dog's credit, she stayed put till I started running, and then we're both up that track, you know. And that was the first time I saw something strange. And then sometime later, we were driving up the wee tarmac road, about to turn right onto the farm track, and just up a couple of 100 yards up the road at the entrance to the quarry, there's a large greyish figure standing right in the middle of the road, looking down the road towards us, and there was an orange reflection coming from its eyes. Now at the time, I thought, oh, that just must be a person. It was only later, many, many years later, when I started looking at this, I realised it couldn't be. As I say, it was an accidental watching of Finding Bigfoot that made me start thinking, that's what I saw. The 30 years passed with me thinking, I don't know what that is. It was kind of in the back of my mind. It kind of recedes more in the back of your mind as life kind of takes over, you know. And it was just an accidental viewing of that programme, and I started to think, these details are very, very like what I've seen. But that's not possible. Bigfoot's an American thing. It's not, I've never heard of that in Britain. And then I started to look into, well, all the American stuff to see if the details did match, if the descriptions matched, if all these other circumstances, you know, it's like it was just so similar that I thought, okay. So I started looking at the British stuff to see if there was any British stuff, and that's when I started coming across I think the first thing I came across was there was a couple of sightings reported up at Torfins in Aberdeenshire back in the mid-90s, and there was a cryptozoologist who was quite prolific at the time called Mark Fraser, and he documented these sightings. And these guys had been out in the woods around Torfins, and they'd seen a large dark figure with kind of reddish glowing eyes, as they described it. And I think the first time they saw it, one of the guys threw a stone at it and it disappeared into the woods, and then they saw it a wee while later. There was 3 of them, and it actually chased them when they were in the car, and they described it. Now that made me think, God, that's not that far from where I saw something, and I just started researching it more. And then I found, yeah, there's a lot more stuff that sounds like what I've described, and then I found out, God, it's all over Britain, and then that's when I started speaking to, you know, Debbie and stuff like that, and found out I'm not the only person that's had this, and their experiences are so similar to mine.
Even by family and friends, you know, I always get asked the same questions, and one of those questions is, why is this creature not seen more? And I guess the answer to that is, well, if you look at the sightings map, it's seen a hell of a lot. There's 500 plus sightings. And also to counter that, I would say we don't know how many of these creatures there are, if they are indeed flesh and blood, how many of these creatures actually exist. If that number was as low as it could possibly be to maintain their survival, then it's a slim chance that they could be surviving somewhere remote in Scotland. They could be traversing the country on some sort of pattern, a regular pattern, which a lot of the researchers think that's exactly what they do. They use they follow the food essentially, like any animal would. And they're more than familiar with our habits. You know, they've been watching man for a long time, I would imagine. But you still can't get away from the fact that they should be being seen, they should have been captured. It makes sense. But are we just thinking with a human, are we using the logical perspective from a human's mind? I think maybe we are. Maybe are we underestimating these things? Maybe. But nevertheless, you know, you still have to approach these questions with a high amount of skepticism. And you also have to ask the researchers, which is what I did, how do they think that Bigfoot stays so elusive?
One of the first things that I get asked is how, in Britain today, in an urbanised society, a Bigfoot, woodwoose, wild man, whatever you wanted to call him, be him human or ape, could hide. Quite easily, in all honesty. We haven't looked at any of our cave systems. We've probably discovered 5 to 10% of them. We don't go out into the woods every day and look. And when we do, we're walking the dog or we're playing with the kids, and we're not looking up. And we're not looking down. We're just going about our normal, everyday human life. So we're already distracted. You could be sat 3 feet away from you in a bush and you wouldn't have a clue. You wouldn't know.
To be honest with you, I don't expect to see one myself. I simply don't expect to see one, because for them, everything they do is about concealing themselves. Everything they do is about hiding from humans. Obviously, yeah, and from animals as well, hiding and ready to jump out on deers, for example. So it's natural for them, but I think it's a matter of life and death, for them.
I don't think it's a stretch in the imagination to think that they're doing things like creating ditches in the deeper woods, sticking logs and branches over them and hiding in there, you know, but unless you're brave enough to really go raking, you know, how hard can it be though to hide in, say, a load of brambles or a bunch of gorse bushes? It could be that simple.
We don't live in this urban environment that we think we live in. It's an urban myth, yeah, and these are masters of their own environment. They are used to being out in the open 24 hours a day. We're not.
We're just not very good looking either. Majority of people wander about oblivious, quite often don't see things that are right in front of them anyway. And I think when we see them, when we do have sightings, it's when they've dropped the ball, when they're not paying attention, when they've made a mistake or for some reason they've been distracted, they don't see us. When I saw one, it didn't know I was there till I screamed.
I think the idea that we live in a country where you can't elusively travel through the countryside without being seen is a misnomer. clearly there's big patches of fields and grasslands and hills and mountains and forests where there's just nobody there, even outside of towns and countryside, villages. There's these black areas. It's an island in darkness, you know, and we're not off the path ramblers or trekkers, British people. I mean, there's some wild campers and outdoorsmen out there, but they're few and far between. People don't know what they're doing. We prefer to stick to the path, a lovely country walk along a path through a big park like this, perhaps. And there's very few people out in this side, in the woods, where we are. We've seen lots of people passing on the path. We see lots of people walking their dogs. But take a 100-yard trek into the woods, and I think you'll find different things.
I think they mainly travel and hunt at night, I think, mainly, obviously because it's dark and they don't want to be detected. So, and even in the nighttime, they will hide in the shadows, because, like I say, it's being seen by humans is really a no-go for them. So even at night, they will hide in the shadows.
One of my examples for this, and how I started to reconcile that there could be unknown animals, big animals like Bigfoot living here, is something to do with the deer population. So I discovered there's over 4 million deer in the UK, roaming about the place, epidemic proportions apparently, and yet you never see them. You might occasionally see some grazing in a field beside a motorway, but it's rare, or on a country estate. It's rare, but there's 4 million of them. How can you not see 4 million animals wandering around the place? And I think that kind of realization for me told me that, okay, there could be a large hominid or whatever it is roaming around here. It definitely would have something to eat, that's for sure. And who's out there looking? You're not going to find what you're not looking for.
As news of Elusive made the internet and in Facebook and popular forums about cryptids, I was being contacted by a lot of researchers and a lot of skeptics talking about the idea of a wild man in Britain, how they didn't think there was enough food here to support them. Now, initially, I thought maybe they had a point, but it didn't take me long to really come to an understanding that there's more than enough food in Britain, having lived here all my life. But I wanted to speak to the other guys that have been doing this a lot longer than I had, just to see what they thought.
Where would they get the food from? They'd what? They'd hunt and gather, they'd forage like we did before farming was invented.
If you're talking about food, it's not a problem at all. There's plenty of animals, creatures. There's deer, wild boar, rabbits, squirrels.
Well, I would forage. I'd hedgerow, I'd fish, I'd use the streams, birds, eggs. There's a multitude of food out there that we can eat.
When you got the rivers, the streams, you got trout, salmon, crayfish. I mean, that's only the animals that I know.
The food we eat now, we're not supposed to eat. We're not supposed to eat all this processed food. We're really not. With hormones injected and this injected and that injected. That's not the way to go, is it? We're supposed to be eating a natural diet like they would on a daily basis. We're supposed to be drinking clean water like they would on a daily basis. We're supposed to work out and use our bodies constantly all day. As a person, I know that you can adapt to anything. People can adapt. We're great at getting put into a situation we don't want to be in, but we conquer it. We adapt and we conquer. They've just been doing that forever.
They've been here thousands of years, and they're taught naturally from birth to how to catch these animals, hunt, without being detected by humans at the same time.
There's food everywhere, and I think there's very few natural predators here in this country. You know, we may have these big wildcats, perhaps. You know, there's enough evidence to say there's a lot of them, but they wouldn't make a single dent on our livestock population, or with the deer, even, which are in endemic proportions at the moment, apparently nationwide. So I think when it comes to a creature like this surviving in our countryside, it's more a case of what isn't there to eat, and not what is there.
A lot of British researchers talk about patterns. In fact, it's not just British researchers, any investigator really should be looking for patterns when they're doing any investigation. And what we're coming across really is I guess the key question is, obviously these wild men have to eat if they're flesh and blood. So one part of the research goes into what are they eating. The second part is how are they traversing the country, for the most part unseen.
We instantly think of a road when we navigate anywhere. We think you get in the car, you get in the road and you go. We haven't always had roads. Before the Romans come, we didn't really have roads, did they? But they must have navigated. So I thought, well, I'll look at ancient spring water, and see if I can find any sightings that appear around them. And there are a lot. There are a lot of sightings. I pulled 20. I thought I'll do it as scientifically as I can. I'll just pull 20. I won't have any favourites. I'll pull those 20 and I'll see what I can find in those 20 sites. And in every one of them there's an ancient well.
So we talked earlier about, are they transient in their habituation? Do they move through certain areas through certain seasons? Could that explain why sometimes there is one or two repetitive sightings over years at the same time of year? Or do they stay in the same place and feed in that general area? I think they do both. I think when the feeding is good and the locale is good, they stay and maybe move around a little bit. I think where it's poor, they move around.
Get your map, your Google map, simple Google map, get your area and pull out and pull out and pull out again. And you will be able to get from one city to another by a green corridor, by either using the river, the railway, the golf course, whatever you want to use, you will find a way of getting there. If you don't want to be seen, you won't be seen.
So you mentioned something about somebody assessing there could be 2,000 in the country. I don't think as many as that even. I would imagine somewhere between 500 to 1,000 max. Now there's a theory about the big cat population that's exploded here, allegedly exploded here, that there could be up to 1,500. And that's over a 40-year period. 40-50-year period since the Dangerous Wild Animals Act was introduced in the 70s. And I think that's reasonable. And cats would probably breed much, much quicker and have more seasons than something like a large hominid. So I think they're probably very rare. They're spread out. Some of them travel, and some of them stay put.
I don't know how they avoid inbreeding. I think somebody has to travel somewhere, out of the local area, It's not beyond the scope of possibility that some of them are using the length and breadth of the country. They will travel group to group or, I do think there are corridors. I do think they have to do that. I do think so. I don't think they can stay. As I say, what happens, they're in a habitat, and then people start coming in and logging, foresting or building houses. They've got to go. They've got to find somewhere else. So I think they do move about. But I don't think they do it unless they have to.
Now, as you know, there are a number of things that cause debates within these cryptid Facebook groups and forums on the internet, and researchers and scientists also. And one of those is whether or not cryptids in Britain are using undiscovered cave systems to hide in. I think it's a valid question, and it's something that we have to look at. Now, a lot of skeptics have poured scorn on this, saying that the disused mines in Britain, Britain is absolutely littered with mines all over it, that these mines would still be full of poisonous gases. Now, some of them will be, but not all of them. And to think that we've discovered all the cave systems is just not true, because geologists think otherwise. So I wanted to know what people thought about this. Is it possible that these cryptids may be utilising undiscovered or discovered cave systems throughout Britain?
Where do they sleep? That is quite a difficult one for me to know. Which is if we knew, we would obviously be able to find them. So they do whatever they can and sleep wherever they can. Most likely in the most difficult place where humans can't get to, or where humans would want to go, or would even think about going. There's so many theories.
I think, yes, mine shafts would be great to look into. There was a sighting in Dorking Deepdene in Surrey, which is not so far away from here, where two brothers were exploring a mine shaft and they heard a roar come out, and they left the mine shaft, and then they were bluff charged in sound only. They couldn't see the creature, but a large creature bluff charged them, through the foliage. They left the area. Now, that to me would indicate perhaps a family group or a male with young living in the mine shaft, because the challenge was from outside of the mine shaft, I think, and that was a warning as far as I'm aware.
Fife, north of here, is full of mines. And there's quite a few sightings from Fife, you know, in Scotland, yeah. Up Bathgate Hills, there's the Silverman sighting from the 80s, which is quite interesting. A large silver greyish figure running alongside a car up the Bathgate Hills. I've got quite an interesting set of stories from a forum about a guy who was going up the Bathgate Hills. Every winter they would get chased off the hill. They found footprints in the car park in the snow and all this kind of thing. There's a big old silver mine under those hills, you know. So yeah, I think mines have a lot to... I do think they're probably used.
There's a theory in the United States that they follow railways, that follow power lines. You know, as a guide, it's just a nice straight route to follow. Bigfoot sightings along these very old ancient monuments to me would just represent an old and passed down route that would be passed down to younger Bigfoot, just like elephants pass, you know, routes to water to their children and so on and so forth forever. I think that would be exactly the same thing. This has been here for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. This is a route we've always known. Now there's a new route, some pylons that follow this straight line across this hill. You can follow them to get there and get home.
My job as a filmmaker really on this project was initially to present the research in a really unbiased fashion. But what I found myself getting embroiled in this stuff and entrenched in this stuff, and you do tend to pick up biases. But one thing that is coming up more and more is the paranormal aspect of this, and there are two places in Britain that are particularly key. One of them is in Hull, on that East Yorkshire coast there, up to Bempton. And the second one is a really weird place. There are UFO reports coming out of here, dogman and werewolf reports, Bigfoot reports coming out of this place, and even a pigman report, if you can believe that. And this particular place is called Canic Chase, and that's in Staffordshire. So I headed over to see Ian Gunner.
Canic Chase, I think Lionel Fanthorpe in about the 70s with the Weird Fringe report came to Canic Chase, and they said there was something like 98% of all of the werewolf sightings and dogmen sightings in the UK happen here at Canic Chase. There's been documented cases of around 30 or 40 of these over the last 50 years or so. The earliest modern day case, if you want to call it modern day case, that I found was about 1879 from Woodeaves. It's about 10 miles away from here. Nick Redfern wrote about it, and it was called the Beast of Bridge 39. And it was a story where a gentleman was riding along on a horse, and the horse was pretty tired, it was walking, and he was making his way to a small little village. And as he passed the Trent and Mersey Canal, I think it was, as he came past this plantation, what he described was this ghost-like figure jumping out, catching onto the back of the horse and terrifying him and the horse. And the horse then breaks into a canter from its walk. And he's so scared of it, whatever this sort of 7-foot being is, that he swipes it with his riding crop and it goes straight through it. And the horse, like I say, bolts and runs away. Eventually he makes it to this small little village, and he's so perturbed by what he's seen, he tells the story in the pub. And one of the gentlemen there was so scared he refused to travel home by that bridge that night. So that's probably the earliest case that we've got of documented modern day case of this sort of thing happening. One of the people actually remarked to him and said, that'll be the man monkey that you've seen. So over 100 years in this local area. When you fast forward to things like, right the way up until the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, it really bursts into life then. You start to see cases all over the place. And what's unique about Canic Chase is there are some quite aggressive cases here, quite confrontational cases where people have seen this creature close up, even been attacked or chased by it as well.
For me, it was a bit of an unusual thing to see and hear about initially, because I thought, well, how does such a small country sustain such a large animal and the amount of food that these things are going to eat? However, reports came flooding in. I remember seeing them in the early 80s, actually. I saw that was the very first incident I actually heard of. And that was at Canic Chase. But it had been mixed up with, walking tall dogmen type experiences as well in that location. So it would seem there was a numerous different things being reported there. My first investigation was 1991 of a Bigfoot incident that took place at Canic Chase again, in the woods, in a place called near Walker Woods Reservoir. Now, it's quite a large location, and the story is that, because I interviewed these two guys, and you know, they were in the 30s. I believe they were absolutely being legitimate when they were telling me about their experiences. And I could not find any form of deception taking place. They'd been out there in the woods, it was at night, and they were heading home. And they thought somebody was actually following them. And they kept stopping and looking around, couldn't see anything. They carried on a little bit further, they could hear the crunching of branches and twigs and things. And this, whoever it was getting closer. Made no attempt to hide itself in a sense of making sure that it was heard. Big branches, twigs were snapping. Maybe as if, he even mentioned that they thought it was being done on purpose, as if to say, hey, I am here. And they suddenly got this feeling as they were moving on that they were being watched, and this oppressive feeling came over them, and they started to get a little bit worried. Now, as time went on, they quickened the pace. This thing quickened its pace to the point where they ended up running. I guess panic, fight or flight steps in. This panic, one runs, the other one's running. So they got these two guys, it's around about 11:15 at night, running through these woods crazily, trying to get away from something they cannot see, but are hearing. Now at some point, when they stopped, because they purposely stopped sometime, and then just to listen, are we being pursued? And it was dead quiet, and they thought, okay, it's not with us anymore, whatever it was, it's not there. And they didn't really know what was going on. But at that moment, just a seconds later, there was this almighty thump, as if something had just landed right next to them. And they could hear this breathing, they could hear the movement of this thing. It was only about 8 foot away, 8 or 9 foot away amongst this bush. The bush was moving, and yet they couldn't see anything. They could see nothing. But they described from the sound that this thing was bigger than the average human. Its weight, its posture, the sound of it in the environment, they just knew that this thing was something really, really weird. And they absolutely freaked out. And they actually separated in panic. One of them lost each other, so they ended up running off in different directions. And of course, when I'm interviewing, and one of these guys says, I've been going up there towards the reservoir for years. He said, I'm never going up there again, ever.
The area that we're standing on right now initially was part of the Shugborough estate that I mentioned before. In about 1900, I think it was handed over to the military, and it became the Brockton training camp. And that was where the troops trained for the Somme in the First World War. There was about 500,000 men that would have been right in this area. It also then became a base in the Second World War and became an airport and a little runway and stuff like this as well. There's underground bunkers to this area, which the locals still remember. We've seen as kids growing up here, we would often see military sort of manoeuvres taking place in the chase. You would find in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, military equipment, meshed out and hidden away, and then 2 hours later it's gone. Never see it moving across the roads, never see it tracking or anything like that. So there is a military aspect to that, and it's strange that so many of these dogman sightings happen directly on top of that old space. Is there a connection? It's hard to say, isn't it? But it's undeniable, the fact that they happen on the same area. So when we think about werewolves in Britain, you have this historic idea that we see them at night, we see them during full moons. Yet here on Canic Chase in 2007, there was a mailman who witnessed one of these creatures during the day, which makes you believe that it's flesh and blood. Yet another aspect of it is when we look back at 1973, there was a kid from Eccleshall, which is about 7 or 8 miles away from here. And he phoned up his friend, and he says to his friend, I'm turning into a werewolf. My skin's changing, I'm growing hair and all this sort of stuff. His friend's a little bit concerned. Anyway, a couple of hours later, that kid is found dead on the crossroads in Eccleshall with a stab wound to the stomach or to the chest. He'd killed himself with a silver knife. It begs the question, was it a mental health issue? Was it a real transformation? Was it ergo poisoning or something like that? You get both of these aspects when we look at Canic Chase. You've got the supernatural or the paranormal, and you've got a very sort of flesh and blood aspect to it as well, daylight sighting. So it's a real enigma, Chris. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, I suppose. So I've brought you here to the German War Grave Cemetery up on Canic Chase. And this part is the epicenter really of the dogman, werewolf and Bigfoot sightings on Canic Chase. Originally part of the Shugborough Hall estate, it was given over to the First World War efforts, and this is why you can see the German war graves behind me. Most of the sightings on Canic Chase come from this area, and it was here in 2007 that West Midlands Ghost Club came with Nick Duffy and took what they claimed to be very credible eyewitness accounts. A local postmaster and a scoutmaster had seen this thing during the day, startled it, and it had rose up onto its hind legs some 7 feet high, muscular, and made its way into the bushes. This is why I find this place so interesting.
Very much like the skinwalkers of Northern America, some of these things seem to have red glowing eyes. And for me, that tends to be a little bit of a giveaway that this phenomena, this Bigfoot strange creatures phenomena, is a bit twofold. I think there is enough evidence to support that, yes, there are real Bigfoot type creatures probably out there within the world. And yes, they live in certain habitats well away from humanity, and for good reasons. However, I think we might also be dealing with another type of phenomena which could be metaphysical in nature. Because for me, what's really interesting is that when you start researching strange animal sightings, strange beasts, be it the dogman, the lizard man, the mothman, they've all got red eyes. The skinwalkers got red eyes. These red eyes, to me, seem to be the indicator to suggest, is it a screen memory? Is it something that is being projected to them, so therefore this is what they see? A bit like in the alien abduction scenarios. Or that these things are shapeshifters in some sense. So I think it's very, very difficult subject because you're dealing with something which could be a physiological creature such as Bigfoot, and at the same time a metaphysical phenomenon which could represent shape-shifting or, you know, some type of screen memory type experiences.
Hi folks, I'm here at Canic Chase with Ian Gunner and Michael Appleby, and we're doing one of a few wild camps here at Canic Chase. Now Canic Chase is probably the biggest hotspot for Bigfoot sightings in Britain. The number of cases on record I think is around 12 around this area, and if you tie in paranormal sightings and ufology, the finds in ufology, UFO sightings and stuff like that, you're probably talking hundreds, if not thousands, over the years of strange goings on in this part of the country. So we've come deep into probably one of the most remote parts of Canic Chase to do an investigation and see what's what. There's not really much more we can do. We can put ourselves out there, put ourselves into the right places, and hope that something happens. It's no use us wandering around the woods, banging on trees, doing wood knocks, and calling out to any potential Bigfoot or whatever else might be out there. We're hoping that if we just set up camp, which we've done, the weather was awful earlier, but things have improved a lot. It's a clear skies now, and we've got really quiet in here now. So hopefully, if there is anything that happens, hopefully we'll get it. So what we're going to do is plant a couple of audio devices. We're going to set a trail cam up after within a sort of perimeter around where the camp is, in the hope that we're there just out of sight, just out of earshot, potentially we might pick something up. And we can always use a bit of intention. I mean, using a bit of woo terminology there, but there's not really much else we can do. It's a needle in the haystack, so let's try it and see what happens. I've got to take advice off the best researchers that I know, and we're willing at this stage to try anything, because finding structures, finding glyphs on the ground, we've been doing that for 12 months whilst making this documentary, so it's time really to try anything and everything and see what happens. So let's see what happens. So it's 5:30. Interesting night. Due to the nature of last night's weather, we set up camp really late last night, waiting for the rain to stop, and it just meant that we couldn't really see the location properly, and we ended up trying to put
we ended up putting the tent up under the tarp, which was not really that practical. However, we nearly called last night off because of the weather, so we waited. You know, it was 11 o'clock by the time we set up, because we just had to see if that rain would stop as the forecast predicted, and it did. And it's a really clear night and a beautiful morning. Set the trail cams up, they're still running. I'll go and collect that now, collect the audio devices, and see what's what. In the tent last night, hell of a lot of snoring going on. I think we did a lot of walking yesterday. Covering Chase is it's not huge, but it's pretty big, especially when you're zigzagging terrain and whatnot. But it's a whole different world during the day. I think when you're in the tent, you always suspect something's walking around. You can hear things, what you think of footsteps and deadfall. But as such, there was nothing that really stood out last night as wildman or cryptids or anything unusual regarding just your everyday camp, really. So again, it was always going to be a needle in a haystack, so I guess we keep trying.
Now, this investigation is it's 2 years, and for all the wild camps that I've done, for all the night investigations I've done all over Britain, we've produced nothing really, nothing compelling. But that's not really surprising given, you know, what we're looking at. But one of the spookiest places in Britain, or one of the most notorious forests to camp in Britain, is Harwood Forest up in Northumberland, and that's very near to Britain's third biggest forest, Kielder, and there's some very strange reports coming out of there. So I got in touch with a guy called Fell Wanderer, who is a prominent wild camper. He runs a well-known YouTube channel for bushcrafters. So what else could I do but go up to Northumberland and spend a couple of nights camping with a Fell Wanderer just to see if we could get anything.
Well, I've camped here in groups, I've camped here on my own, and I can honestly say I've never experienced a more spookier place. Some of the best times I've had has been on my own when I know there's nobody else around for miles, and I'm hearing, often at the early hours in the morning, 2, 3 o'clock, I'm hearing knocks and breaks, all happening within a couple of seconds of each other. So I know it's not the wind because it's been totally still, and it's just, like I say, there's just nobody around, and when you're on your own it can just really freak you out. But it's exhilarating at the same time.
So this evening marks the beginning of this 2-night investigation into here at Harwood Forest, which is in, I think Harwood and Kielder, the forest in general, is the biggest forest in England, and I think the third in Britain. I think there's 2 bigger forests up in Scotland. So there are a lot of stories coming out here, some from wild campers, some from some from farmers, some from other researchers in the BBR, that talk about people finding sheep carcasses in here, strange noises in here. Neil Young, who's been a member, and probably I think he was a founder member of the BBR years ago, has had experiences in here as well. He's had some parts of his camping kit removed and suddenly appear from nowhere. So tonight is really all about getting, as ever, like I've been doing for the last 2 years, getting out here, putting myself in the environment. I've been joined by Michael Pelby of the BBR as well. I'm here with Fell Wanderer, he's experienced some strange things in here. He's also an experienced wild camper. He's familiar with the area. He knows it inside out like the back of his hand. And I think that's important when you come to these places. Don't just wander in wildly and blindly, you know, speak to someone that knows what they're doing. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to plant a few audio devices. I think we've got three separate audio capture devices. We've got 2 trail cams that we're going to set up, even though they're forever unreliable and never capture a thing, but we've just brought them, so we're going to try them. We may try a bit of we may try just a bit of just putting it out there, just a bit of intention. Look, I've got to this point 2 years down the line where I'm willing to try anything and anything, because in regards to, yes, I found a few footprints that are a little bit sketchy in my opinion. 2 years down the line, what do I think Bigfoot is, and do I think that he's in here? The honest truth is I don't know what he is. I don't even know if he's real, because I'm relying on the evidence of other witnesses. Do I believe their stories? Absolutely I do. Do I think it's supernatural, which is a big thing. There's a big thing in the British, and even in the world over in the Bigfoot community, there's a big thing about it being this supernatural. There's more quantum theories being thrown in, and multiple dimensions and that kind of thing, putting Bigfoot into the same category as a ghost and UFOs and other strange phenomena, or the paranormal as a whole. And I think there is some connection to that. Am I willing to bet my life on it? Not at this point, no. I think, unlike other research, I still think there is room in Britain for a flesh and blood animal, and that is always been my line of inquiry. First, rule that out. Talking to the witnesses, it looks like the accounts are heavily favour something corporeal, so something flesh and blood. Do I rule out a supernatural element to this? Absolutely not, because I've been in and spoken to witnesses, people like Paul Sinclair, that have witnessed strange things and all manner of phenomena, including Bigfoot, in the area where UFOs are seen, cattle mutilations, strange deaths of cattle and other wildlife. So is it related? I don't know. Hopefully tonight we'll find out.
I like being under a tarp, I like being in a bivvy. And to me, a bivvy's the way forward. You can just roll it out within 30 seconds, that's your shelter. If you're sure it's not going to rain, it's brilliant, you don't have to put a tarp up. But it's usually sod's law, if you don't put a tarp up, it usually does rain. But I like this A-frame configuration because it allows me to lie down and I can see all the way around. If I hear noise through the night, I'm not in a tent, you know, I can see what's going on. So to me, it's a simple form of camping.
So as with any other camp, we put out the equipment, we light a fire, we cook some food, and at this point I really want to know, you know, Damien's been wild camping a long time now, and I wanted to know what he thought about the possible existence of a wild man, be it flesh and blood or something more supernatural. And what did he think the prospects of it being real are?
It's still a mystery, but I am switched on about this place now. For a while I was frightened to come back, because the more I got to know, the more I was kind of like freaked out about it, thinking, because I didn't know, you know, I'm on my own. Obviously I haven't got a weapon or anything, and you know, if they wanted to do harm, they could do it. But then I got thinking, well, if they wanted to do harm, they could have had plenty of chances before now to do it. So I kind of like, it was psychological. I got over it eventually, and now I'm quite happy to come back out in the forest and camp on my own, which I do quite frequently anyway. I think these creatures, they can appear and disappear and perhaps only leave 1 or 2 prints. You know, like the one I found, it's just one on its own, and it looks to me like a footprint. I had a good look around, I couldn't see if there was a track leading to it or leading away. I couldn't find anything. So my only hypothesis was that this thing had just materialised, perhaps took a drink, got it, walked away. And that's perhaps what it is. It's just because people talk about tracks leading somewhere, then just suddenly stopping. Well, if that's the case, where have they gone? And the only logical explanation for me is they've just disappeared. They've changed form. Have they become energy? I don't know. But that's maybe why there isn't much evidence, because they're not in the physical form that often. So
Obviously we've determined that you do believe there's a supernatural element to this.
I believe that, and I shouldn't really believe. I should be looking at. I theorise, but I do tend to believe. So I am a kind of little bit. I do have an open mind. I think they are. I think they can be flesh and blood, sometimes, which is a nice argument to have. I've got it both ways. But there is times I go through my mind. I think, well, you know, shape shifting, energy. You know, this is just crazy. This, like, I've got a kind of like convince myself that I'm not going crazy, because that's the only thing that makes sense to me.
So it's about 2:30. Nothing as yet, so I'm just gonna lie in our tents and just listen, see what's what, see if we hear anything. That's all we can do.
As the evidence eludes us and investigating this phenomenon becomes increasingly difficult, you know, I was starting to hit a brick wall with this stuff, and then the supernatural element of this came to life when I started investigating and working with a guy called Paul Sinclair, who lives in Bridlington, very near to a very traditional cryptid, the werewolf. And there's been many sightings in Flixton. In fact, it's quite infamous, the Flixton werewolf, the beast of Barmston Drain. This is the same creature that's been seen over centuries in the same area. Now, is this some sort of supernatural creature, some sort of ghostly phenomena? And it's a very difficult thing to investigate. Nevertheless, I had to get there, speak to Paul, and find out all about it.
Obviously, this area is, to the people local to this area, it is associated with stories of the Flixton werewolf. And anybody in UK and out at UK will be familiar with stories and legends of the werewolf, but I think that's where it ought to stop. I think when we're looking at stories regarding what in America they call the dogman, here we call it the werewolf, we've got to step away from silver bullets and talk of the full moon because I don't think it's any of that. I'm no expert on this, but I don't actually think we're doing ourselves any favours by talking about things from movies. This thing, if it exists, and I do believe it does, has been around hundreds, if not thousands of years. Whether it's a species that's flesh and blood and somehow evading human contact and just being seen briefly from time to time, or whether it's something else, as in some kind of interdimensional ghost type apparition, I really don't know. But the people who are seeing it swear that they never want to see it again. I mean, it is absolutely terrifying. But about all I could say, Chris, is that I do believe this thing's real. I just don't know what it is. I started asking a few questions. Now, there's a guy who used to be security guard at the golf course at the side of Danesdyke. And he's an interesting man. I mean, he lived up there. That were part of his job accommodation, and he found himself wandering around the edges of the golf course on a night on a regular basis. They were having a few problems with intruders at one particular time. I'll not mind me mentioning his name. It's called Dean Daltrey. He had 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers, and he tells me that one night, and I think we're going to about 2012, he were walking perimeter at golf course, and there was an animal making a noise in Danesdyke, but it was big. I'm not going to say huge because we're in the darkness, we don't know how big, but it was also making a strange howling noise, a type of sound that he'd never heard before, and it frightened him. Now, to say it frightened him, anybody who knew Dean Daltrey would realise that he's 6'4" and about 19 stone. He says, and normally with his 2 staffies he'd have gone into the woods with torch and had a look. He says, but the only thing he could do after hearing that sound was get back to his apartment and lock the door. Now, what makes it interesting is we listened to a few radio broadcasts over the years, and somebody claimed to have recorded the sound of a dogman. Dean at the time tried to make this sound to replicate it for me. So as soon as I heard that sound, I realised that's what he was trying to do, and I recorded it, took it to him, and he claims that was the sound. So obviously the sound came from somebody in America. But I just wonder what kind of species of animal we're dealing with. We can't doubt that it has got some kind of intelligence. When I spoke to the lady at the Spittal Inn, I saw the deeds from the Spittal Inn. And they talk about this infestation of savage beasts. I mean, this is probably a few years ago. And she looked up onto Flixton and Staxton Wold, and she said to me, we'd not talked about dogmen, bear in mind, she said to me, I think there's a Bigfoot up there. And I took it with a pinch of salt. I just thought, well, that's a strange thing to say. But if those type of creatures are supposed to exist in America and other parts of the world, and they're said to be highly intelligent, then why can't we have something that's evading human contact in this part of the world? I mean, it might be evolved enough to realise that we probably only things that could offer it any kind of a problem. Simply because even though it's physically, it could overpower us, we could probably think of something to hurt it with or to capture it with. I mean, there is an element of intelligence with it for certain if it exists. And if the thing at Sand's End, what the fishermen saw, that kept dipping its head every time the light hit it, there's an intelligence, that implies intelligence to me, because if I shone a torch beam into your face now, Chris, your head would go down. You wouldn't stand looking at it like animals with lesser intelligence do.
In the last 18 months, the accounts have just keep coming in. There are dozens of accounts, not particularly with myself, but with the BBR and Paul Sinclair. And it was back in East Yorkshire with Paul Sinclair up in Hull that there were some particular strange events happening up there, some very bizarre animal killings. So I went back up there to speak to Paul and to get the lowdown on just exactly what's been happening. So today I'm at Danes Dyke, which sits between Bempton and Flamborough. And the dyke itself, if you was to follow it a mile down from here, would lead us to the coast. Now, anyone familiar with this subject will know of the beast of Barmston Drain. And of course this area, if we're covering around 30 or 40 square miles, which I think is reasonable, and I think the witness accounts sit within that area, I think it's reasonable to assume that we're dealing with the same creature. I mean, it's to my right here, above the drain, above the dyke here, and the drainage ditch there, where a witness a couple of years ago saw it sat at the side of the road, crouched, and he said this thing was an enormous thing. And this gentleman got back home and even woke his wife up to, you know, and she said that was totally out of character for her husband to do that. So he's obviously something, whatever he's seen, that's really shaking him up. And it's in these places, in and around the dyke, that strange noises are being heard, and there are multiple witnesses talk about crashing trees and howls and ungodly screeches coming out of here. So again, as I said before, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that whatever people are seeing, potentially this could be the same creature. And if you think that it's heading down, it can head to the coast up and down here unseen, no problem. Is this indeed the same creature that Paul Sinclair and Bob Brown have seen?
The cliff top sort of saga, I don't know what you'd call it, is a strange one. It was late on in the year, probably November, and me and Andy Ramsden had gone down to RSPB Reserve. Obviously, I'm saying obviously, but we were trying to catch these lights. That's what we were trying to do.
There's viewing points at Bempton Cliffs, like, you know, it's all built out of wood, you know, because it's a bird sanctuary, so you can see birds down on the cliff because it has you a bit out. And we stood there looking out to sea, and I heard something like clamber up the cliff.
And in my peripheral vision, on my left-hand side, something seemed to spring up from cliff edge, an animal, which is, it's incredible if you looked at these cliffs because they're sheer. So I don't know whether, well, I didn't imagine animal because I saw it. It were on all fours and it were large. I'd have said it was a deer, that's the size it was, or a pony. But nothing would be on edge at cliff. It just seemed to spring up and it were away. It must have cleared the fence, which is about 41 inch high. How do I know it were 41 inch high? Because I've looked into missing people and other things, and I've ended up measuring it over years. So it cleared a 3-bar fence and it were off field. I don't think it were a deer because it were heavy on its feet. I could hear it going up the field, and that's the only thing Andy got from that experience. He could hear it. It were one of them things, pitch black night, it were there on that side, and I traced it as I'm watching it going into darkness.
Paul says, "Did you see that?" I said, no, I didn't see it, I heard it. And then I was spooked then, me, if you know what I mean, because it's we go and we have a laugh and you think, but you do expect to see something because it's a strange place, but when something does happen, then it's because I get spooked easy, me. Like Paul will say, "Are you all right?" And I say, "Yeah," but if I can be there for 4 hours or 2 minutes, because when I'm there for 2 minutes, I think, I don't want to be here no more, you know, you get that fear of dread like we were on about.
After that, we didn't think too much about it, and we probably stayed another 2 or 3 hours. But then, on the way home, back up to the car park at the RSPB, I stuck a torch into the field behind RSPB Centre. And obviously, we're not so green as grass that we don't see eye shine and mistake everything a rabbit or a fox or a badger, but this were different. There were 2 large eyes, and they looked a yellowy white. They were strange, and they were big and wide apart. So we knew it were none of what I've just mentioned, and they seemed a good distance off ground. Andy got a bit nervous.
As Paul's torch lit the ground up where it was, it looked like, I saw its face look from like left to right, like it knew we were there, if you know what I mean. And I just remember it, how flat it's, like the top of its head was, and the bone structure above his eyebrows. Kind of, I wouldn't say, kind of monkeyish. You know, like how it, you know, like see Planet of the Apes, and it's like, they've got a prominent brow, haven't they, if you know what I mean. Looked like that, but I don't know if it were catty or not, to be fair, or out like. I just remember because I was scared, because I was looking at it. I didn't want it to come and get me, because Paul had walked off, and I says, well, I said to him, I'm scared, like, so are you coming back or what?
I started walking across into the field. You have to go up a bit of a bank, and Andy didn't want me to go. He's shouting, come back. I've got the torch on this. I'm not the only one that can see it. Andy can see it. After a while, I swear we could see it blink, and he thought the same. But after a while, I don't know whether it dropped its head or it just disappeared. And Andy's shouting, where's it gone? It's gone, Paul. And put the torch back. It's back, but it's moved further back. So I carried on going. I must have walked to probably 40 yards out into the field.
You know, since I met Paul, he's one that he don't give up with it. You know, I've got kids and stuff like that, so I have to like find time for it. But Paul's constantly on it, and he wants to. If we see something, he'll run straight towards it, if you know what I mean. And that's what he wanted to do, like go find it in the field. How frightened me. I thought, I'm studying on my own now. So I thought, yeah. But Paul wanted to go find out what it was, if you know what I mean.
I felt, I just sort of thought to myself, I'm being lowered out into the field here. I sound daft because I'm here to tell the tale and nothing happened. Do you know what I mean? But Andy said, come back, he's sort of urging me. He didn't like the situation, so I did. When I got back to Andy, we shone the torch, it's come back. This thing lowered down, and at one point it looked like it were about a foot off the grass. And we could see these big eyes looking at us. We thought it were on its belly. So what it was, no idea. And then all through last year, Bob Brown would come up onto the cliff tops with me 3, 4, 5 times a week in the night, trying to film the lights. Bob's favourite saying became, throughout the year, eyes on us. This was in 2017. This time I'd bought a really powerful rechargeable torch. I'd stick it on distant hillside, and sure enough, these eyes were there. Same place. I'm not going to say exact same place. He didn't put a stake in ground and say this is my spot, but very, very localised to where we looked every time. Shine it for a bit, eyes would disappear. We'd carry on what we're doing. 5 minutes later, we'd stick them back. They're there again. Bob will tell you, every time we went up, those eyes were there and they were watching us. What I didn't understand at the time was, throughout 2017, animals were being killed in very close proximity to where we were observing throughout that year.
It was a standing joke with me and Paul. He would say, is the eyes there? And he'd get his torch out. Certainly are. Every time we went up there, they were there. And then all of a sudden, when we put the eyes on them, they'd duck down as though they knew we knew they were there. And it was like they put their head down. And then we'd carry on doing what we used to do. And then a little bit on again, we'd put the torch on again. Same thing every time, or else it might move a bit more over. And then you think to yourself, what are them eyes?
Is it living in caves? Is there something that's living in these sea caves of Flamber and Bempton? You would think if there was, then these guys who fish for, sort of work the sea for crabs and lobster, who are around those rocks and those sea caves. And remember, they're not accessible. Some of these caves have probably never been entered, but you'd think they'd see traces or signs of something, and I'm not hearing that. Did I see some that were physical? I definitely did. Were those eyes real? Yeah, I didn't imagine them. It weren't a couple of bottles shining in grass on a wet night. They were real. Did it move backwards? Yeah. So there's something. But what is it? The unknown something, and is it responsible for what me and Bob Brown have seen, these eyes, not just Andy Ramsden throughout 2017? Well, those eyes, or whatever those eyes belong to, the physical body behind it, well, was that responsible for these animal mutilations? I don't know. I don't think we can rule it out, but...
Paul Sinclair had been doing a lot of work with a farmer who had been losing sheep hand over fist. He's now lost 54 sheep in a year, and the sheep have been killed, and the injuries to these sheep are very unusual. But what's more interesting than that is that one day the farmer told Paul that he had gone out to check the sheep in the morning, and he found 30 sheep crammed into a sheep run designed for 6 sheep. Now, a sheep run's the last place sheep want to be because they get tagged in there. So I can only assume that something had scared these sheep and caused them to corral themselves, and actually 4 of the sheep suffocated or died of fear that night. So I wanted to speak to Paul again, and I wanted him to talk me through what happened.
Right, we're sort of at this area where things have been happening since 2017. I first became alerted to it, as I already said, New Year's Day. But we're on the fields. We're not going to disclose where, because it's just not fair to people who have to live this and work this for a living. But that is an example of the sheep run. Obviously we wanted the corralled area where they'd run into that holds 6 sheep nose to tail. Well, imagine on 28th of June, this same sheep run, probably the very same one, had 30 sheep in it. How could that be? Dead of night. And somehow 30 sheep have been forced into this, jumbled on top of one another, looking like a complete just pile of animals in distress. And as I say, some of them were dead when the panels were removed. So it just gives, while we're here, we just thought we'd just give you an example of what I've been talking about. Nothing better than actual thing.
The question of whether this phenomenon is a cultural phenomenon or a psychological phenomenon is a very valid one, and it's been at the centre of many debates within the cryptid movement. And for a long time I've been flip-flopping back and forth between the two, flesh and blood, supernatural, paranormal. I really wanted to speak to the witnesses and the researchers to get their thoughts on this and to find out where they stood on the matter.
It's hard because people don't want to come forward. A lot of them get reported as paranormal, as ghosts. Because if you're in the woods and you hear running footsteps or whispering or something's thrown at you, you instantly think ghost in the UK, because we haven't got anything to reference it to, have we? So you see a dark shadow in the woods, it's a shadow man, it's a ghost. We don't have bears, we don't have wolves, we can't say like the Americans, oh, it's a misidentified bear. So when people are seeing upright, bipedal, hairy, human-looking men in the woods, what are they mistaking them for? There isn't anything we can mistake them for.
My main field of work is straight, ordinary, if you will, vanilla cryptozoology. It's the search for mysterious animals that are flesh and blood things, the same way that you or I are. They're just creatures unknown to science, or ones we think are extinct, but maybe maybe they're not extinct, like the Tasmanian wolf, the orang pendek, the yeti, the giant anaconda. These are all, I think, real animals. But you can't ignore these weirder ones, like the Owlman of Morn and Smith, or the Mothman of West Virginia, or the dragons of ancient legend, which are transparently not flesh and blood as we understand it. So you can't anchor yourself solely in one camp. You've got to be open-minded enough. And that's what being a Fortean is all about. It's the Centre for Fortean Zoology that I work for. So yeah, we do investigate these stranger cases, even though my main passion is for straight cryptozoology.
There are people that have reported ghostly experiences, the sightings of apparitions, spectres, phantoms, call them what you will. However, some of them have been reported as a physical, as in they look just like you and me, as a physical person that was there at the time. There is always that possibility that sightings of those type of experiences happen. Do we get apparitions of things from really old? You know, I mean, why don't we get apparitions of the saber-toothed tiger?
I think people see these things because they're part of what I call the global monster archetype. In every culture on Earth, you get the same monsters. You get dragon-like beasts, you get hairy giants, you get little people, you get monstrous dogs, monstrous cats, and monstrous bird-like creatures. For instance, Muslims believe in these creatures or entities called jinn, which they say are made from smokeless fire, which you could interpret as energy. But I've been told independently by a number of Muslims that they can take the form of dragons, hairy ape-like creatures, huge dogs, monstrous birds, and monstrous cats, and even little people. So is that a coincidence? I don't think so.
Many people, especially recently, have taken the fact that Sasquatch are so inconceivably good at what they do, the fact that they seem to be relentlessly ghost-like in their refusal to be seen, although not to be heard, but to be seen. And people are over-extrapolating from that, in my opinion, to conclude that they must be supernatural, that they have to be going into other dimensions or disappearing, literally vanishing before our eyes. I personally think that the more remarkable aspects of Sasquatch capability are better understood as arising from natural laws that we already have in the books, so that we don't have to invent a whole new way to frame them as the only creatures, for instance, on Earth that can be invisible or travel through portals to another dimension.
Talking specifically about cloaking. Now, let's say you're looking at an animal, suddenly it's standing over there, you think you see it, the next thing you know, you don't see it, it's gone. But you see some outline move out of place against some foliage or trees or bushes or whatever. Is this some magical spiritual power that this animal has because it's a hairy covered deer eating supernatural beast, you know, which doesn't really match? Or is it, are you seeing what the first man who saw a cuttlefish or a squid change colour sees? You know, some inbuilt ability to change colour, to camouflage, that is not known. You know, when we first saw the cuttlefish do that, or the squid change colour, or an octopus mask itself onto a rock, that's a magical power, isn't it? Because how could it possibly have the ability to do this? Surely this isn't natural. But it is natural. We know it is. Now,
I think they live right here in our same dimension, and that what they do is employ some sort of faculty that we will need to understand. In my new book, Next of Kin, Next Door, I speculate that this faculty has to do with electromagnetic energy. Now, that might sound as far-fetched to some as interdimensional travel, but keep in mind that many animals are already known to make use of electromagnetic energy, especially marine creatures, but there are also some land animals that do. And in fact, human beings are occasionally gifted or cursed with a strange electromagnetic force of their own that they can't control. It's often the case that people can't wear watches because they'll go dead, or their smartphones will malfunction because they seem to give off some sort of disruptive electrical charge. And on the more extreme end, some people are known as electric people, and if they walk into a room, they can make light bulbs explode, especially when they're in an exercised, elevated emotional state. So science doesn't yet understand what it is that allows these select individuals to exhibit this electromagnetic force or power.
It's not that these things are not natural, it's that we don't understand them yet. Like in the way we didn't understand meteorites or giant squid at one point, or the lightning. They're part of our world, they're things that happen in our world, but we just haven't got a handle on them yet. So it seems that, you know, people who are reporting these things, and they've been reporting them for centuries now. If you look back into medieval times, they had the wood woes, and in Scandinavia they had the trolls, these hairy giants. They're genuine people who've seen something that's alarmed them, but they couldn't have seen a flesh and blood animal. So it has to be something different. So we have to look into the global monster archetypes, and these things are reported all over the world, and some of them are almost certainly flesh and blood, like the orang pendek in Sumatra, the yeti in Tibet and the Himalayas. They're in places that can support them as biological entities. There's enough food there, there's enough room for them. There isn't in Britain, so they have to be something different. They have to be something that is not here in this dimension all of the time, or they have to be something that is only physical for a short amount of time.
There are parts of this research that I don't agree with, but it doesn't mean they're wrong. It's like getting a parcel off the postman and saying, I'm not opening it because I know what's inside it. You can assume what's inside it, but until you open it, you don't know, do you? So I don't cut off any research. If people want to come at it from the paranormal, well, that's how they've got to look at it, isn't it? That's their journey. If, like me, I think he's a flesh and blood down to some kind of humour. Other people think that was ridiculous. But we might all have a piece of that jigsaw. And by saying, no, I'm not listening to you because your opinion is completely different to my opinion, I'm just going to rule you out, I might be missing a massive piece of my answer.
One of the biggest misconceptions out there on the internet is that witnesses do this for some sort of fame or attention. But I can tell you this, getting witnesses to appear on camera is incredibly difficult. And I'd say for every one witness that will go on camera, you've probably got 6 or 7 that won't. So here are a couple of accounts that Paul Sinclair was given due to the popularity of his book, Truth Proof.
Right, so as we came past Harper's Chip Shop, I noticed something on the roundabout, and it looked sort of like a big, sort of scruffy, dark sort of dog, a very large dog. I couldn't see its eyes or anything, and I think it was like on its back legs but bent forward, looking down at the ground like it was maybe sniffing something or eating something, and I could see that its body was quite muscular, and it had a long sort of tail that sort of like went to the ground, and its face was a bit like a German Shepherd, but it wasn't a dog because it was too big. But that's what I first thought it looked like, a very large dog, which it was quite, well, frightening really. And it did sort of make me sort of stop, just stop and sort of think, am I really seeing this? But it was definitely there because I looked at it from Harper's Chip Shop all the way to the roundabout as we were going round as well. But I couldn't see its eyes, or, I didn't notice its eyes anyway. And then we turned back round and went back up to the chip shop, turned round and then very slowly came back towards the roundabout so I could see if it was like just a reflection or something else on the roundabout, but there was nothing on the roundabout this time. There was just nothing there. But there was definitely something the first time when, we approached the roundabout.
We were sat across from each other. I was sat with my back up against a tree. One of my friends was across the other side of the fire from me. He was about 6 foot away. 2 of my other friends were one on my left and one on my right. We were having a laugh for an hour or so, and then it started to quieten down a bit. It started to nod off. And I just heard a little twig snap. And I just happened to open my eyes just to see my friend, who was directly across from me, picked up in the air, upside down by his ankles. We thought it was by his ankles. It actually been got hold of by his calves. My friend was saying that after, when he'd actually been dropped down on the floor, he got pins and needles in his bottom half of his leg because the pressure on it. And mate, you should have seen the bruise. The bruise was black and deep purple, and yeah, it looked very nice to know. It was about 2 or 3 foot off of the floor. All out broke loose, and we were all, well, we can imagine, we were all frightened and screaming and shouting.
Can you describe arm, Jason, or what you saw, please?
The only thing I saw was like a big black arm holding him on the calves. And then whenever everything kicked off, it dropped him, and it tore off into the woods opposite me, crashing and banging. And then as it got away, it was like a gunshot, like a tree exploding. And then literally as that happened, there was another one at the back of me. So then it was like straight away, there's more than one. And one of my other mates, he was panicking. He was after just running off. He was just, as soon as he got light, we were off, we were gone.
Yeah.
We didn't look around for anything, we just got out of there. And then when we got home, we had a look at his leg, and both of his calves were purple and black.
And did it encompass his calf then, Jason? Did the hand go all the way around it?
The hand went fully around his calf, mate, yeah.
Wow. And obviously I know you're on the level with this story because you were reluctant to tell it previously, but so this isn't me insulting the story, but you are absolutely certain that this couldn't have been people trying to frighten you, aren't you?
Well, let me just say this to you. For the person to have picked my friend up by his calf,
Agreed.
And it wasn't just off the floor, it was a good 2 or 3 foot off of the floor. For one person to do that, they would have to have been Superman, mate.
Maintaining a sceptical viewpoint on this as a filmmaker is very important, and there are times during this film that I've wandered far from that path. And there are also times during the making of the film that I've become increasingly frustrated with the lack of photographic evidence as well. But I think that's down purely to the lack of researchers out on the ground. But I was surprised one day when I was contacted by a guy from Wales called Bigfoot Tony, who was a video analyst and was well known in the US and Canada, as he had done a lot of video analysis on some of the Sasquatch and Bigfoot footage that they had filmed. I didn't know at this time that he had actually filmed his own footage quite by accident, and when I saw it, it almost left me with more questions than answers.
So I was coming up along a trail, which I believe it could have been a human trail, but it wasn't one that was regularly used, I don't believe anyway. And it could have been used by Bigfoot, could have been, possibly. And as I was coming up this trail, I noticed a small stick that had been broken. So I proceeded to film with the phone. And you know, sometimes if you're too close with the phone, it will just, you know, capture the background. The background will be in focus instead of the actual twig or whatever you're filming. So that's what happened. It was too close, and I didn't realize at the time, but it was actually filming the background. When I watched the video afterwards, I think the next day, I noticed in the background, thinking, oh, maybe there might be something there. And yeah, as soon as I saw, got to the bottom, there was an actual figure, which looked like a gorilla. That's the only thing I can say. It actually looked like a gorilla.
So quickly, Deb. Obviously, what's this last? So 2 years. I mean, obviously we're out in Scotland doing a night investigation.
There's two things I'm going to say on that. One, I don't really know. I'm filling up and I don't want to fill up on camera. It's, to me, to be able to come back and stand in the dark like this after this time because of Elusive and all the witnesses that have come forward and all the people that have helped along the way gave me the strength to be here today in the dark, in a forest, in the middle of the Wales, yeah? And I might be struggling, but I'll be back, yeah? And I don't really know. And it's also given me that fear was mine. That wasn't what he put on me, that was my fear. And if he's out there or he stood 10 feet away, I think he knows that now, yeah? And we're at peace, me and him. And we can, you know, go our separate ways and just carry on doing what we're doing.
Just think of where you've come since 12 months since you went back to Brutal Hill over a year ago.
It's more. It's
it was
2
a massive,
years. It's about,
big deal
it's
for
about
you.
2
That
years
wasn't it?
ago. Getting
and
out.
Look where you are now.
In the woods, even if you can only do 4 or 5 steps from the car, do those 4 or 5 steps, and next time do 6, and next time do 7, and eventually you'll end up like this, you know. And I couldn't be happier. You could give me a choice now of whether you give me £1,000 or we just stay another night, and I'd stay another night.
Yeah.
And that's thanks to you.
No, well, everyone's. It's a group effort. It's
If I hadn't have been able to speak about it that day and say everything that I needed to say and feel comfortable being able to say it, I wouldn't be stood here today. I would still be stuck in the house terrified. Yeah.
This is why we take the statements. This is why.
Yeah.
You just got to. I don't really know how to put it into words. It's incredibly emotional for me to just be standing here now. Now I'm going back to.
Yeah.
And now I would hold out my hand to him because I don't see anyone being harmed. I don't see anyone being hurt. I know not all things are perfect and lovely and nice, I know that, but we've just stayed in this forest in the dark enjoying ourselves with quite a few, you know, sat silently, and it's just an amazing place to be. And they could be 5 feet away from that light and you just wouldn't know.
Yeah, it's amazing that.
Yeah, so don't get disheartened. If you're out and you're researching, you know, we're in the middle of Scotland and we're still struggling. It is hard and you just have to keep at it. You know, you just have to keep at it. You don't get something every day.